what is the truth about these claims of abduction?
I don't know. Nobody I interviewed had any firsthand knowledge on that phenomenon. I certainly believe people have experienced stuff like that. At least they believe it, because you look at Dr. John Mack, who's a Harvard-trained psychologist and psychiatrist, looked at the phenomenon of abduction in the 90s and early 2000s before his death. And he affirmed that the people he psychoanalyzed certainly experienced something real to them. But what is the abduction phenomenon? I really don't know.
UFO whistleblower David Grusch gave several interesting interviews recently, and Tucker Carlson asked David Grusch very interesting questions. The question if the alien abduction phenomenon is real or not is definitely one of them. But before we go deep into this topic, here is a short recap of what has happened in the last few weeks, as not every viewer will have gotten all the information, and it will therefore be difficult to follow our train of thought. The journalist Michael Schellenberger, who became known worldwide through the Twitter files, revealed that the U.S. is in possession of at least 12 UFOs. His sources have confirmed to him that David Grusch is right and that there are too many shocking details that he does not want to talk about publicly. One of these shocking details could be the topic of this video.
Writes that multiple sources have confirmed whistleblower David Grusch's claim that the United States government possesses a number of non-human vehicles. These sources are, quote, either high-ranking intelligence officials, former intelligence officials, or individuals who could be verified as being involved in the United States government UAP efforts for 3 or more decades, according to his reporting.
So, confirmation, aliens are real. This is exciting. What do you make of the baker's dozen of alien spacecraft that we have?
Between the U.S. military and non-human intelligence, non-human life forms, is very shocking, and it's shocking for me personally. There's things I kept out of the story that I think were just too shocking and certainly harder to confirm.
Then we had the press conference at the end of November, where U.S. Representative Tim Burchett from Tennessee said that there has been a UFO cover-up since 1947, and how a law that was supposed to provide transparency on the subject was literally sabotaged.
Well, thank y'all for being here. This is a very important issue, and this shows the amount of coverage that we have today. I'm Tim Burchett, Congressman from Tennessee. I've studied this issue for quite some time, and honestly, it just kind of fell in my lap up here. I believe our country, at least since 1947, has had a long history of covering this issue up.
Then Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke in the U.S. Senate.
Disclosure Act that he and I co-sponsored, and portions of which we will pass in the NDAA. I say to my friend that unidentified unanimous phenomena are of immense interest and curiosity to the American people. But with that curiosity comes the risk for confusion, disinformation, and mistrust, especially if the government isn't prepared to be transparent. The United States government has gathered a great deal of information about UAPs over many decades, but has refused to share it with the American people. That is wrong, and additionally, it breeds mistrust. We've also been notified by multiple credible sources that information on UAPs has also been withheld from Congress, which, if true, is a violation of the laws requiring full notification to the legislative branch.
Chris Cuomo published several interesting interviews on NewsNation and on his YouTube channel, The Chris Cuomo Project, on the UFO topic. Then, the Daily Mail released a bombshell article.
And now, this bombshell Daily Mail article came out this week saying a secret office of the CIA has collected at least 9 non-human spacecraft from all over the world over the last 20 years. The Daily Mail also reporting of those 9 spacecraft, 1 had crashed with considerable damage. The 2 others were completely intact. The retrieval mission was allegedly performed by the military, and then these spacecraft were handed off to private corporations. Let's bring in Nick Pope, who investigated.
Then the Australian news channel 7 News Spotlight published a very interesting interview with Ross Coulthart and Garry Nolan from Stanford University.
So you know what's coming?
Yeah.
So there has been a cover-up?
Yeah.
And there's been an active cover-up. And what's nice, actually, frankly, about the transparency is the machinations and maneuvering of the people who've been keeping things behind the scenes. The light has been shown on them. I mean, just look at what the Department of Defense announced last week. They announced an office to study the phenomenon.
Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet, another whistleblower, went public and spoke of a cover-up, even though he himself was not involved in the matter and only spoke to people who were. Harvard researcher Avi Loeb gave an interview to The Hill and revealed that a former Lockheed Martin executive did not deny to him in private that the company was in possession of extraterrestrial technology.
The one happened a few days ago when I had a group of people from Washington, D.C. In my home for a visit to discuss some other physics project. And one of them was a high-level official, former official in Lockheed Martin. And I just wanted to clear my understanding. And I asked him, well, there is this testimony about potentially corporations or outside entities that are outside government that have possession of materials of interest in terms of extraterrestrial, spacecraft. And I expected him to say, no, that's complete nonsense. Let's move on to another topic. But instead, he said, it may not be wrong.
Trevor Timm wrote in The Guardian, "The truth may be out there, but believers and skeptics alike should be able to unite on one thing: force the government to reveal what it knows and what it doesn't know. We will all be better off." Ross Douthat published his opinion in the New York Times. The probabilities of extraterrestrial life or non-human intelligence aside, the best reason to doubt such secret keeping is that it would require too much of a government that has let so many major secrets slip over the last 75 years. The deep state let the Soviets steal atomic secrets, and the mainstream press published the Pentagon Papers. It had its Cold War laundry aired by the Church Committee. It saw much of its war on terrorism architecture rapidly exposed. So it's hard to see how it could have kept a lid on programs that study actual extraterrestrial or interdimensional visitors, especially over generations, and especially if we're supposed to believe that private contractors are part of the cover-up as well. The counter-argument is that there are still things we know that we don't know in the deep state vault. So there might also be things we don't know that we don't know, especially if you imagine a hypothetical UAP program that's extremely small, walled off from the rest of the national security state, united by a belief that it's protecting Americans from the cosmic shock of uncontrolled disclosure, and so deeply classified that its functionaries might fear being murdered if they leak. While the rest of the Western mainstream media bubble seems to largely ignore the topic, but it's only the biggest topic in living memory, so don't stress and don't worry. YouTube channels like ours will take care of your customers' need for information. Now let's dive into the topic. Ross Coulthart and Garry Nolan spoke in their interview about the stigma that surrounds everything to do with the UFO phenomenon, and that a decades-long disinformation campaign has not failed to have an effect.
I mean, why is this still such a stigmatized issue? Why is it that in a private company, when one admits that one has an interest in UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, there's normally somebody in the group who makes a silly smirk and talks about little green men?
Right.
Why do we do that?
Well, I think decades, frankly, of this kind of disinformation and purposeful diminution of people's opinions has had its logical outcome.
But it's unjustified?
I think it's totally unjustified. I mean, and from a scientific point of view, and because I, of course, have been approached by scientific colleagues that said, Garry, you're going to ruin your reputation with this. And my immediate answer is, what scientist takes a possible explanation off the table, especially when you've got so many people, credible individuals, saying that this is something that's happening?
This issue is even more extreme when it comes to the alien abduction phenomenon. We have already published a video on this in the past, where we talked about the most famous cases, such as the case of Betty and Barney Hill, but a lot has happened since then. Stanford researcher Garry Nolan also revealed in the interview that he had an encounter with an entity in his bedroom that he cannot explain.
This is probably the more unusual one, and again, I'm hardly the only individual to have had this. Is you wake up as a young boy, I would have been probably 6 or 7 because it was in our first house that my parents had bought in Windsor, of little men in the bedroom. I was awake. I knew they were there. I could see them. And I'm pretty sure it was either John Mack's or Whitley Strieber's book, Communion. And there on the front cover was, and I can feel the hair on my arms going up, was what I saw.
That's the classic grey alien face.
I remember I dropped the book.
When you say the government's been involved in a cover-up, do you think they've been concealing?
Oh, yes.
It's an amazing allegation.
I know it for a fact. I just know that.
Why do you know that?
Because I've spoken to the people who are about to come out and whistleblow on it.
However, the most famous case of a close encounter with extraterrestrial beings is the Ruwa incident in Zimbabwe. Netflix released the documentary Encounters about this on September 27, 2023. In this incident, 62 schoolchildren allegedly witnessed a UFO landing and beings with big eyes communicating with them telepathically and alerting them to environmental problems and the danger of technical progress. A few days later, Judy Bates, headmistress of the school, was abducted by the creatures from her bedroom at night. The Ruwa incident was investigated by John E. Mack of Harvard University.
We saw something silver, and then we quickly ran to the logs, and we saw a silver thing, and we saw a man standing next to it.
What was it? What did it feel like when he was looking at you?
I felt scared.
It felt scary? What was scary about it?
Well, I felt scared because I've never seen such a person like that before.
Did you see the eyes? What did they look like?
They were going like that.
They came running up here in such a panic. And even if we had staged it, they could not have run all together like that. Even if we practiced it, I don't know how many times. But they came up here like a living snake. And they just came, we were in a staff meeting and we just heard them screaming, ah, and then they were here,
After I'd worked with 40 or 50 of these individuals, I discovered to my amazement that there simply was no psychiatric explanation of this, that something real had happened to them.
Dr. John Mack is Professor of Psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. Professor Mack has spent the last few years listening to some people with very strange stories.
Are there common factors to these experiences? Absolutely. The typical story, this would be a condensation of an abduction incident, say. Person is driving along in their car. They may hear a strange humming. They may see a UFO up close, or they may just see the light, powerful light coming down over the car. They feel that the car is no longer in their control. And next thing they know, they're being taken by this light or by some energy. They may see 2, 3 more of these small beings. The most 80 to 90% of them are these little grays with these huge black eyes and rather pear-shaped heads and somewhat spindly bodies. And they are transported up on this energy to the UFO, sometimes to a smaller vehicle, and then that vehicle goes up into the larger mothership.
John Mack published his book, Abduction: Human Encounters with Aliens, about his research findings in 1994. His work was both controversial and groundbreaking within the academic community, and it sparked much debate. This went so far that in May 1994, the dean of Harvard Medical School, Daniel C. Tosteson, appointed a committee of peers to confidentially review Mack's clinical care and the clinical examination of the people who had told him of their encounters with extraterrestrials. After a 14-month investigation, Dr. Mack's academic freedom to study what he wants and to express his opinions freely was confirmed. In March 2022, longtime New York Times journalist Ralph Blumenthal published his book, The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. What is your opinion? Is the alien abduction phenomena real?